I'm Melissa Stark. I look after renewables and energy transition services for Accenture. I'm really excited today to talk about industrial clusters. We've got a fantastic agenda, spotlighting clusters that are transitioning to net zero, and some great speakers to talk about the opportunity. So with that, we're going to kick off the session with a video.
So thanks everybody for being here today. My name is Louise Anderson and I'm with the World Economic Forum. So the reason we're all here today is to launch this initiative, accelerating the transition of industrial clusters towards net zero. And today we've got 4 signatory clusters with us to launch the initiative, representing Australia, 2 from the UK and 1 from Spain. Industrial clusters have been around for over 100 years, acting as economic growth engines in economies. They have been very familiar with sharing risk, resources, and logistics. What's different now is they can leverage the synergies of co-location to accelerate their path to net zero. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So without any further ado, I'm going to welcome Stephanie Jameson from Accenture to the stage, and Stephanie is going to facilitate the first session. Stephanie, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I can say that after months of hard work from all of our teams, we are so happy to be here. This is the moment we've been waiting for, to launch this global initiative here at COP26. And I'm really happy that we've got senior representatives from all 4 of the signature clusters here. And for our time for the next 45 minutes will be spent with them, listening to them, their experiences, best practices, and how they got started. The first cluster we're going to focus on here is the Quinana Cluster. The Quinana Cluster was the first cluster to sign on to our global initiative. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Quinana, it's in Western Australia. It's an industrial area. And I'm joined here by Chris Otten, who will help me bring to life the work going on in the Quinana Industrial Cluster. So hopefully, if the technology's working, then we'll have Chris with us. Thanks for joining today, and especially given the time zone differences. I really appreciate, I know it's late in your day, but it's such a pleasure to have you here with us. You were the first cluster to sign on to the global initiative here that we're launching now. And I'd like the audience to hear from you about the Quinana Cluster. Chris, would you start by telling us a bit more about the industrial area, the companies that are there, and the industries? Chris, I'll turn it over to you to just give us a short summary of the Quinana Cluster.
Thank you for that, and hello from down under. The Quinana Industrial Cluster that I'm going to talk about is located in Australia, on the west coast in Western Australia, and it's in the capital city, Perth, and it lies on a 12-kilometre stretch of coastline, which is where the major industrial area is located. We call it the heavy industrial core of the cluster, and that's called the Quinana Industrial Area. The first industry to set up there was an oil refinery back in 1955. Momentum gathered pretty quickly. Today it produces alumina, nickel, titanium, cement and lime, a range of fuels and gases, and numerous industrial chemicals for process inputs for other industries in the cluster, and for export to the regions and also internationally, of course. On the utilities front, there's bulk recycled water for industrial purposes, several gas-fired power stations and LNG supply. Today, it's one of the world's best examples of industrial symbiosis in action, with in excess of 170 product and byproduct exchanges and 34 participating companies. It's growing rapidly and it's deeply linked into the West Australian mining, oil and gas and agricultural regions. New industries are coming. There's several facilities under construction, including a couple of lithium hydroxide plants for the battery materials, 2 waste-to-energy plants, a nickel sulfate production chain for the battery industry, high-purity alumina, a couple of those, graphite, a couple of those are in the planning, and others in the lithium space. And we call those home to, they're part of what we call Lithium Valley. Sorry, West Coast America. Renewable hydrogen will become a big part of the story in the future, and it's a great story with a long way yet to go. It's referred to by the government as the state's premier industrial area. Economic impact, about 16 billion Australian, a skilled workforce of 30,000 direct and indirect workers. Interestingly, 2/3 live within 15 kilometres of their workplace. But it has some issues. New land for heavy industry needs to be brought to market. Congestion at road and rail and port common user infrastructure exists. But we're going to get all that fixed, hopefully, when we get a new deep water port, container port. And of course, we do need to have a carbon reduction plan to get to net zero. So in our favour, what we have is an organisation called Quinana Industries Council, geographically focused industry association that I lead, that brings all its members together to create a collective interest in getting the big picture issues sorted out. So I think the KIC is the key to the industrial area's success. It has a board of members to keep the focus on the right issues. So that's pretty much the background.
It's quite a large cluster, complex with a number of industries, and it sounds like there's growth coming as well. What about the ambition? What is the plan? You mentioned carbon reduction. What is the ambition, and how do you see that ambition being achieved?
And thanks for the question. So our carbon reduction plan was agreed to last year by the board of KRC, the board of members. And I'm particularly very proud of them, because the effort will need to be a collective approach. The goal is critically important for an integrated and complex industrial cluster like Quinana. The interwoven nature of the synergy exchanges means they all need to participate, and if they want to maintain their customers, they need to do that. And as they say, the customer is always right. So why do we need a carbon reduction plan? Well, to not have measurably real plans in place to get to net zero carbon, it means to lose customers, and the best way to achieve the aspiration is to work together. The members of the cluster have been working together for 30 years now, so it's not new. It's unusual, but it's not new. Industries working together to achieve a common goal is a form of industrial symbiosis, in my book, the collective result of the whole being greater than the sum of its individual members' efforts. But in Australia, is government policy helping? Well, to be blunt, in Australia, not so much, but it's catching up to where industry's at. So that's good. Industry's been running a long way ahead of public policy in Australia. And our carbon reduction plan has 3 phases. The first, which is the inventory of our greenhouse gas emissions. And the companies have to annually report to the federal government, so data gathering is relatively easy. Our Scope 1 emissions, 7.2 million greenhouse gas equivalent tonnes per annum, and Scope 2, another million. So our inventory is completed. The second stage of our carbon reduction project will investigate what practical technologies are out there that can be taken on by industry as individual operations or collectively as a collegiate. And that has 5 streams. The first is underway, and that's with the KIC members looking at practical technologies. The innovators is the next stream. What's coming at us? What are they learning about? What are they bringing to market? The next is the educators and research. What are they telling us is coming at us? The collaborators, we've got lots of groups working on this sort of stuff, so we're getting them together to tell us what that's about. And then there's the public sector policymakers. And I want to report to the board by mid-next year with a prioritised set of recommendations. And finally, the third stage is implemented by the members. So tracking of the results over time using that federally reported data is something that KIC will be doing. And I've got a really good example of a possible outcome to power the Quinana industrial area towards its carbon reduction aspiration. And it's a collective approach. Think of this in the context of industrial symbiosis, product and byproduct exchange. And I've already said we do this well in Quinana. So industry will need renewable baseload electricity, process water, process oxygen, hydrogen, and steam, and will need to accumulate carbon dioxide before it's emitted to air, and deal with that. And it needs to be competitively priced so that the companies can remain internationally competitive. I think a big part of the solution lies in the production of geothermal energy. In Australia, we don't mention nuclear energy for fear of getting our heads lopped off, so we move on. A Western Australian company and a member of Quinana Industries Council called Goodwater Energy has a geothermal solution that can address all of these renewable needs and more. It's technology that's in use in Finland, I believe, for city heating. The solutions are there to be found. Many of the really good ones need collective industry thinking and action to give them scale and the right political regulatory framework to enable them. In Quinana, if we can get a Goodwater Energy project approval for location within the cluster, we'll be well on our way toward achieving our aspirational goal.
You've got a lot on your hands. And I really appreciate the time, your overview of the cluster. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being the first and for joining into this global initiative. With that, Chris, thanks again. And now I'm going to welcome members of 2 clusters, both in the UK, those from HyNet and Zero Carbon Humber. If you would come on stage, please. And we also have some joining by video as well. So many of you will have seen just a couple of weeks ago through the UK's CCS Infrastructure Fund, the HyNet and East Coast Cluster, which includes Zero Carbon Humber, have been named as the UK's first carbon capture, use and storage projects. That was after a successful bid to the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. For those in the UK, you know that's BEIS. We're delighted that both clusters have signed on to our global initiative and are represented here today. So I'm going to start with the HyNet cluster and ask Nicolo if you would give us an overview of what's going on in the HyNet cluster. And congratulations to HyNet, huge congratulations to HyNet that you've been prioritized by the UK government, which puts you on the track to be live and deployed by the middle of the decade. Would you share with us what the overall ambition is and what are the distinct, you heard about the Quinana cluster, what are the distinctive characteristics of HyNet?
So good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for the congratulations. Thank you for the invite to talk this afternoon. So our ambition, but more than an ambition, is a target with HyNet, is to have it as the first carbon capture, usage and storage cluster to be started up in UK as early as 2025. So this is our target, and this target is in the context also of our company, Eni, that whose target to 2050 is to become fully carbon neutral. And we have some intermediate milestones in Eni to achieve this target. We want to be minus 25% emissions compared to our 2018 emission levels already 9 years from now, and then in 2040 to arrive to be 65% and then 100% abatement of our emissions by 2050, which is the moment in which we will be fully carbon neutral. We have several levers to get there. This is our target, is we think technologically proven, is economically sustainable. And to get there, we will for sure increase biofuels. We will multiply by 5 our capacity to produce biofuels. We will enlarge our share in biochemicals. We will increase our share in renewables, arriving in 2050 to have up to 50 gigawatt. And then we will increase also our capacity in CCUS. Carbon capture, usage and storage capacity for Eni is expected to be 50 million tons per year of sequestration, transportation and storage. Now, this strategy, we see it in UK, well-fitting, because we see that here in UK the race for the carbon neutrality started as early as 2019, when this country fixed the target of the carbon neutrality at 2050. And we see that UK will probably be a leader in CCUS. This technology will be significantly scaled up and will be significantly scaled up during the next decade. So it will be for sure a leader, UK, of carbon capture, usage and storage by 2030. At the same time, hydrogen will play a great role in the UK in the next decade. Hydrogen could be a central energy source for transportation, for industry, and why not also for power. So in this context, sit HyNet Northwest. HyNet Northwest is located in the Northwest, clearly, and the idea of the project is to sequestrate and then transport and store the CO2 produced in the cluster, industrial cluster of Liverpool and Manchester, and store it safely in our reservoir, in our gas-depleted reservoir, which are located 30 kilometers offshore of the Liverpool Bay coast. This project has a few advantages. We know as Eni very well the reservoir. We have been producing from them since a long time, and therefore the geology of the reservoir is fully understood. At the same time, we can repurpose the existing infrastructure. This is an important advantage to cut short the time to market of this project. The project is really demand-driven because there are several companies in the Northwest that ask us to make available our transportation and the storage system for the carbon capture, usage and storage project. And we were happy to do it because we will be able to remove from the skies of Liverpool and Manchester up to the 30% of the current emission in 2030. This project very rapidly has a lot of benefits for the Northwest. You will be able to generate up to 60,000 new jobs in the next 10 years, 6,000 jobs every year during the construction phase. And we are proud to say that it will be able also to protect 350,000 jobs, existing jobs that are existing workers, existing families, or from the hard to abate sectors. There are, as you know, producers of cement, fertilizers, glass, papers. There are refineries, power, that are hard to abate sector, and these people will have the possibility to continue their business, and we are very proud to think that this can be achievable. So we are very committed to deliver this cluster and this carbon capture and storage network for the success, for sure, of the decarbonization process of UK and Northwest.
Great. Thank you, Niccolò. I'm going to ask you one more question before we move on to talk to your colleagues from the Zero Carbon Humber Cluster. I'm curious what role the government has played in the HyNet cluster. How has the government provided support?
So the government can play an important support when it can act in a different level. For the first one, the government can help all the players to be together, to get acquainted where the new business has to be started up, a new sector has to be started up. For instance, you have to bring together companies, you have to bring together institutions, you have to bring together university and academia. This is to understand all the potentiality of a sector like the CCUS. Then if you take the CCUS in UK, I think in the short term has been also important the governmental financial support or the government incentives to contracts. To give you an example for INET, INET got a support from a UKRI fund to cover part of the cost, the concept selection and the concept definition cost. And this was a support of £33 million that we got last March. And now in October, we have been 1 week ago appointed and selected as a track 1 cluster. And this allows us for the execution phase to have access to the CCUS fund for the execution cost. And also this is a financial support that is important. Why is it important? Because the rule of the game for CCUS are written in this moment, and so there are uncertainties. So to allow a sector to take off, this is very important. It's done by the UK government very effectively. Then if we want to look in the medium long term, it is important for a new sector to be protected probably because there will be demand and there will be offer. And the demand and the offer of a new sector, I'm thinking transportation and storage of CO2, blue hydrogen. You need to have contracts that allow the sector to become mature. And in this case, what you can have as an example again are the contract for difference for the emitters. So in conclusion, the government for INET played a very important role. We commend the capacity actually of this government to put together the rule of the game for CCUS in UK in less than 1 year. And in conclusion, what the government should always try to do, and the UK was very successful in this, in to create the condition for a cluster and for the companies of the cluster to feel supported, to reduce the uncertainties, and to feel themselves in partnership with the government to deliver the cluster.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to your colleagues from the Zero Carbon Humber cluster, and we have 4 representatives from that cluster. We're joined here by Alistair Phillips-Davies, the CEO of SSE, Will Gardner, virtually joining, who is the CEO of Drax, Cordy O'Hara, here on stage with us, the President of National Grid Ventures, and Dan Sadler, the Vice President of Low Carbon Solutions at Equinor. I'm going to ask each of you a different question if we have time. I'd love to hear your advice for getting started, because over the last year, Accenture and the World Economic Forum have been working on this topic. We developed a number of reports and have been presenting on it. And the single biggest question we get from companies that are operating in a cluster is how to get started. So for there's time, would love your advice. Would love your advice on that one. So with that, let's dive into Zero Carbon Humber. Alistair, I'm going to start with you. Would you tell us Zero Carbon Humber's ambition, just an overview, and what is the goal for the cluster?
Yeah, sure. No, I'd be happy to. I suspect my 3 colleagues have spent more time personally working on it than I have. I've had a few other things to do recently. But look, Low Carbon Humber, it's part of actually a bigger partnership on the East Coast, which would include Teesside as well. So actually for that piece of it, in terms of that piece of advice, it's got real ambition there. And actually the government's shown great ambition in terms of taking such a big area forward. There's a lot of different technologies and possibilities there. So we've got things like potentially gas-fired power stations or hydrogen-powered power stations, carbon capture and storage, biomass, negative emissions through carbon capture and storage on biomass. There's a huge array of different things that people are looking at. We've also got, I think, quite complementary partners in terms of looking at reservoirs that we've got offshore, people who'll build the onshore pipes to store that, who've got experience in building those pipes, and then the various different industries that we've got there too. So if I take SSE's part in that, we'd certainly be very interested in building a carbon capture and storage power station. I don't think that would last 25 years if we think about what the Prime Minister said fairly recently in terms of decarbonising the electricity sector by 2035. We would want to switch that probably to hydrogen and then switch the carbon capture and storage to be used in other industrial processes. I think that's a key part of what's there. We obviously heard a lot of that from Chris, where he really brought alive all the different industries that are sort of down under in Perth in that big area there. The fact that we have a lot of industries there and industrial processes there where we can utilise that technology for doing other things, I think is really important. In terms of what we've got there, there are a few power stations. We also announced with Equinor, our partners, a desire to build a hydrogen power station. So I think hydrogen is a particular challenge. Going straight to green hydrogen, I think most people would agree, is fairly expensive. It's maybe where we all want to be, but maybe using blue hydrogen first off would be quite an interesting way of going about it. Also, turning power stations into burning 100% hydrogen will present some technological challenges. You've probably got Siemens looking at 50 to 70% hydrogen mix at the moment. So therefore, again, using CCS to create some blue hydrogen to start some of these things off. It's all about priming the pump, basically, is going to be very important. So we've got all those possibilities there. We're obviously delighted that that's been chosen, as is the other project on the northwest, HyNet, to be there. There's a lot of people competing in there, I suspect, as well, in order to kind of get their projects done. So, we'll all talk very nicely about each other now, and we'll go for a punch-up afterwards, although, unfortunately, some of the people aren't here to have the punch-up, so that's fine. But I think it's important to have lots of people there. Ultimately, the opportunity to save 12 million tonnes, and I think including Teesside over 17 million tonnes. That's what's on the table. We're clearly going to want to save all that carbon at the end of the day, and there's lots of possibilities as to which ones you pick first.
Good. Thank you, Alistair. A lot going on in the cluster. Will, I'm going to go on to you next, and you have a lot going on in the cluster, but the area that I'd like you to highlight is the collaboration with British Steel specifically, because I think that really highlights the benefits of co-location of companies. So would you mind elaborating on that collaboration with British Steel, Will?
Sure, and thank you for having me on the panel. I'm sorry I'm not there physically, and I hope you all can hear me okay. Yeah. So if I just, maybe I'll give you 2 minutes on track for those of you who don't know what we do, and then that'll be a good introduction to how everything fits together in terms of the cluster and also British Steel. So Drax, for much of its life, was a coal-fired power station. It's about 60 kilometers inland. I mean, the zero carbon Humber basically goes from sort of the coast. The storage of the CO2 for the carbon capture will be offshore, and we're about 60 kilometers inland. And effectively, the idea of the cluster is that we will have a pipeline that goes through the cluster from the coast, and then Drax, as you can probably see on the map that I can see sort of behind you all there, is right at the end of the cluster. Right? And what we've done is we've converted our power station from using coal to using sustainable biomass as a way of effectively becoming a renewable power company. And the next part of our ambition is to add carbon capture and storage so that, let's say, by 2030, we could be capturing and ultimately removing about 8 million tons of CO2 from the atmosphere on a permanent basis and having that stored ultimately under the North Sea. Right? So, but the beauty of the collaboration is really, I think there's sort of three different pieces of it as I would see it. One is there's just the purely physical piece, right? So, for a cluster to work, you need scale. I think Chris sort of highlighted that very well in the Australian case. And you really, I think it's effectively in the East Coast cluster, about 50% of the UK's industrial emissions come from that area. British Steel, which you probably also can see on the map, is quite close to where Drax is. But so by having Drax is arguably the sort of the anchor of the cluster, sort of furthest inland, you create economies of scale by allowing that pipeline to go sort of past British Steel and then to where we are. And so it actually creates a nice sort of economic setup for the cluster in terms of having real scale in terms of the carbon that we could ultimately capture. Second piece of this is ultimately is a bit of there's There's a nice sort of call it intellectual network involved here. I mean, we spend a lot of time with British Steel talking about our plans, sharing our ideas for how we're going to decarbonize, getting ideas from them about how they might do that. I think part of their plan now, which they have to get to net zero, includes hydrogen. So again, one of the attractive things about this cluster, again, as Alistair mentioned, if we end up with hydrogen production, which I'm sure Dan will talk more about in a minute, we end up that that pipeline which goes is going to carry CO2 sort of away from the cluster. Equally, we could have another pipeline carrying hydrogen sort of through the cluster. So there's a nice sort of collaboration, sort of a synergy involved in that. And then the third part of it, call it a sort of a virtual network that we can create, is our ability to take our negative emissions and potentially offset some of the emissions from other hard to abate sectors, right? So again, British Steel or other businesses that may not be so able to get down to zero could use those negative emissions to offset some of what are very expensive for them to actually reduce or remove themselves, right? So lots of interesting ways that the cluster enables all that stuff to happen.
Exactly. Very good. Thank you so much, Will. Cordy, I'm going to go on to you now. As the president of National Grid, your company has a really important role to play here, as you know. We understand the CCS infrastructure is a common goal across the cluster, offering value to those not only in the cluster but also in the region. Would you elaborate on the plans for the CCS infrastructure and including, I'd love to hear about how companies are making the business model work.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a wonderful opportunity to participate today, and I think it's great to see all the different approaches to carbon capture and storage technology across the regions in the different countries. And I think it's obvious to me, listening to this, that we're going to have a lot of learnings to share and move forward with, whether that's models, frameworks, systems, and even the technology itself that's being deployed. I guess I wanted to start by saying that CCUS is really important to the UK. It's an important pillar of the UK government's net zero strategy, and its independent UK advisor on climate change, the Climate Change Committee, came out and said this really is not an option, it's a necessity for the UK to get to net zero by 2050. So really exciting to be part of it. And the UK is now closer than ever to the deployment of CCUS after the successful Track 1 bid selections. Congratulations again to HyNet. And so, of course, we're looking at how we create a new delivery system that takes carbon emissions from those emitter projects, transports the carbons to offshore storage facilities that are safe and that the systems are reliable. And of course, we know that means that the industry in the region of the Northeast, which is hard to abate and decarbonise, will have this major opportunity to decarbonise, have clean air in the region, and create new green skilled jobs in really UK's industrial heartland. And for the Humber region, an opportunity to revitalise the local economies there, and the potential to set up a new green hub for industrial green products and services. So how are we going to make it happen? So National Grid's role, well, it is going to start with delivering the infrastructure that's required. And so we will be taking a role in the Humber system, working with our partners, of course, to deliver the onshore CO2 delivery network. It will be the connective tissue that connects the projects like Will's that he laid out there to the offshore store. We'll obviously be focused on making sure that system is safe, reliable, and then ensuring equal access to all of the various emitter projects that are ready today or in the future. We're laying the infrastructure down, and we know that will create then the incentive for the emitters in the region to look at then the carbon capture, sequestration and technologies to participate in the system. And the infrastructure is long-term, so it will facilitate those projects that are ready today, but then it will also facilitate the ongoing collaboration and discussion for those emitters who may want to transition slightly later. The East Coast cluster is really significant in terms of its scale and the opportunity. So it actually can achieve up to 50% of the reductions in industrial carbon emissions for the UK. And we know by investing in that area, up to 25,000 jobs per year starting from 2023. successful deployment is really going to be about developing the right frameworks and models for first-of-a-kind technologies that we're facing here, and then also incentivizing the demand and utilization of the system. Success, I think, is really on the horizon, and we were really delighted to be selected as a track 1 cluster in the latest government announcements. And I think there's 3 reasons I'd point to why success is there for us to take on. First of all, this partnership, this East Coast Cluster and Zero Carbon Humber, has a phenomenal set of partners, experienced onshore and offshore developers. So we've got the capabilities to deploy in this new space. Second of all, we want to make it work, and we want to work with government. So through the selection process, we now need to develop the frameworks, the business models, and the incentives to bring that all to bear. And then finally, it's just been great to get into the Humber and Teesside region, speaking with local industry, businesses, MPs, even academics who see this great opportunity to decarbonise the industrial heartland there and create lots of green jobs for future generations to come.
Sounds great. Cordy, thank you so much for that overview. Dan, over to you now. We've heard that each company has had a different challenge and different opportunity. Dan, for you, the one thing that I'm really interested in and would love for you to describe it here to the audience is you pulled together 12 major companies to develop this cluster. That must have been complicated. It had to have been complicated. So would you just share how you got started and really how you developed the trust needed to be able to facilitate that?
My pleasure, and afternoon everyone, and apologies I couldn't be there today. Ironically, I've been chairing the Zero Carbon Humber steering board, which is one of the reasons. So just to answer your question, it is hard work, is the first point, and no one should go into it thinking it isn't, because it is. Coordinating 12 companies is a huge challenge, and Equinor are involved right across the value chain, from the license holding position with National Grid and BP to the offshore partnership with Equinor, National Grid, BP, Total and Shell, and then to the onshore partnerships as well with the 12 companies in the Humber. And I think I'd make 6 points, and these are relatively quick points. So first of all, to align 12 companies, you need to align around a common need, a shared value, something that everybody can understand and gives everyone a benefit. And really, that shared value also needs to have strong indicators from government in terms of policy aspirations, so that there is a recognition that it can actually be achieved. And the shared value in the context of the Humber was decarbonisation and becoming a net zero industrial cluster by 2040, actually, or before, which is in line with the UK government's policy ambitions. I think the second point is you need to develop trust, and you do that initially with strong leadership, but also with credible partners and clear subject matter experts. There's 3 things you need to get to net zero in an industrial cluster. You need carbon capture and storage for those industries that can't fuel switch. You need hydrogen for those industries that can, that set you on that trajectory to sustainable hydrogen production and use. And Equinor have ambitions for over 40% of UK hydrogen demand by 2030 in the Humber. And you need BECCS, as Will set out, for those difficult to abate emissions to get to net zero. And the Humber has them in abundance. But what we need to recognise is there's a lot of companies in the Humber. There's the oldest chemical works on the North Bank at Saltend. There's a third of the UK's refinery capacity on the South Bank. There's British Steel, one of only 2 primary producing steelworks in the UK. Then there's the power generation, both at Keadby and at Drax. And to pull that consortium together, you have to be prepared to spend time, send in your experts, talk to all the different partners who have different levels of knowledge in the space for varying reasons, and be able to really make sure everybody can align around that shared benefit position. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of commitment at all levels of the organisations. So that's probably point 2. Now, I think we heard earlier from Chris, actually, this point, that certainly the sum of the whole is without question significantly more than the sum of the parts. And it's not a matter of size, the big guys and the little guys. It's a matter of collaboration, both on a regional basis, across the companies within the region, but to ensure that from a national perspective, they can see that there is a harmonised, well-coordinated, shared value industrial cluster. And that's what I think that the partnership in Humber has been able to pull off in a kind of masterclass of collaboration, to be honest, a true collaboration as well. The fourth point would be to establish contractual frameworks, formalise the relationship, make it real. And initially that was done with Equinor, Drax and National Grid. And what that does is it gives a real focus to the relationship. And from there you can attract other partners towards it with more ease around different opportunities that are coming up, which is where we ended up with the 12 partners we've got today. The fifth point, so second to last, is to use Einstein. Well, my favourite Einstein phrase is, if you can't explain it simply, it's because you don't understand it well enough. And you need to be able to explain it simply both across your internal partnership so that everybody can understand it and speak the same language, but also on a national basis to your government, so that people can be excited by it, they can be proud of it, and they can want to believe it can happen. And the final point, which may seem obvious, but it's not that obvious, turn up. You can't have a consortium where you turn up once every 3 months or once every 6 months. So a consortium has to have passion, it has to have drive, it has to have collaboration, but it has to have people turning up. And in Zero Carbon Humber, when we pull together the steering boards, everybody always turns up. And that gives great momentum, and that's whether it's a national forum, a local forum, or a forum such as the one we're speaking at today. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. I think what you just did was give the advice that people are looking for from your perspective. We've got just a minute left. I'm going to go super fast in a word, in 2 words, in 3 words. What is your advice, starting in the same order that we've talked already? Nicola, what is the 1 or 2 words of advice, and we'll just go around before we wrap this discussion.
But probably for a cluster to be successful, my advice is to be balanced. The answer to the energy transition question, it is not a simple answer, it's a combination of different solutions. So in order to be successful, probably the most important thing is to have a little bit of any technology available. I would recommend for sure a CCUS network, because this reduces immediately the emission, unlock hydrogen and other sources. I would increase at the same time the renewable share. So more than one technology will for sure improve the possibility for a cluster to be successful.
Thank you, Nicolo. Alistair?
Ambition. I think you want real ambition and bravery there, and a bit of alignment with government or whoever the policymakers are. Those are the 2 things I'd go after.
It makes sense. Will?
I'd go with the word
partnership.
Partnership. I'd go with the word partnership. Starts with the companies involved. They need to be really collaborative in the way they work together. And then also with government. They need government as an equal partner in this for it to work well, I would say.
Thank you. And then Cordy?
Thank you. Dan was so elegant. But I would say bring stakeholders along the journey and get local. Explain simply how this works and what the benefit is to the local community.
Thank you so much. And Dan, we're going to take your 6 points as the points of advice from your perspective. And with that, I just want to say a huge thanks to all of you from HyNet and from Zero Carbon Humber for joining us here, for signing on to our global initiative. And with that, we're going to move on to one more cluster in Europe. So thank you very much, and we'll have we'll swap locations and have the Basque Supercluster participants join us up here on stage now. And thank you to Dan and Will for joining in. We have Cristina Oyan from the Industrial Ministry. We have Augustin Delgado, the Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer at Iberdrola. And we have Manuel Nunez, who is the Innovation Director at Petronor, a Repsol company. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for signing on to our global initiative. I'm going to ask each one of you a question focused on the Basque supercluster. Cristina, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. So you're from the Industrial Ministry. Tell us the ambition of the Basque supercluster, and then the question that I've received the most on the supercluster, you probably get it too, is why the word super? What does super mean in the context of your cluster?
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Stephanie. I would like to give a big thanks to the World Economic Forum, Luis, and to Accenture, Melissa, and Marta in Spain to invite us to join the transitioning industrial clusters towards net zero, which is an initiative that fits very well with our energy transitions and climate change strategy, because the Basque government, the Basque country, is committed to the European Green Deal, and we really want to contribute to this European goal of becoming the first continent to achieve net zero emissions. So the Basque Net Zero Industrial Supercluster, well, first of all, as you can see, our economic activity is very much based in industry. Almost 24% of our GDP comes from industry, and almost 50% of our GHG emissions also comes from industry. So we have defined this initiative, the Basque Net Zero Industrial Supercluster, with the aim of accelerating the path towards net zero, fostering the decarbonization of energy supply and energy efficiency of our industry. So to that end, the Basque government has joined the two key main energy companies in our region, Petronor Repsol and Iberdrola, and afterwards they introduced themselves. So now just thank you very much for joining us in this initiative. And together we are planning joint roadmaps to reduce industrial emissions. But moreover, also the Basque country is a strong innovator region according to the European Innovation Scoreboard. And we also want the Basque initiative, the Basque supercluster, to build on our strengths on technology and innovation, and to create market opportunities to scale up technological developments and innovative services. So we are really looking for energy transition powered by industry. And why we call our initiative Supercluster? Because it integrates already existing clusters in our regions, that these industrial clusters are a key part of our industrial policy, that many of them have been working during the last 30 years promoting public-private collaboration, and looking for synergies. There are 16 of these industrial clusters in our region. Almost 1,500 companies in our region are part of these clusters, and 16 of these industrial associations, industrial clusters, have joined the alliance that we are presenting today. So this is a supercluster joining all these industrial associations already existing in our region.
Thank you, Cristina.
You're welcome.
Augustine, over to you. What role will Iberdrola play in the supercluster?
Yeah, good question. You know, from the energy perspective, for the utility perspective companies, we always have been focused on generation, providing the demand that was requested. And it is like a few years ago that we have started looking at demand and start understanding the needs of our clients in terms of, for sure, energy competitiveness, but also about their sustainability goals that they are having. And we have created a business unit to address this this challenge, these solutions that are required from our side, and we understood that there is a lot of things to do in the industrial sector. We were told a few years ago that mobility could not be decarbonized, or that residential heat could not be decarbonized, or industrial is very difficult to decarbonize. And we have understood through these solutions that we are developing that maybe you cannot fully decarbonize in 2030 the whole industrial sector, but you can do a lot of things. And this is what I want to stress here. It is that it is not about the 2050 initiative that we want to be net zero in 2050, that we want, but it is what can be done in the next 10 years to start the decarbonization of many of these industries. So you can see here that there is low temperature industries like pulp and paper, and we are developing solutions for them, heat pumps, low temperature heating, but also self-consumption. Many industries still don't have self-consumption in Spain, and I can tell you that it's fully competitive right now, so we can see that there will be a lot of installations on this regard. And many of the processes can be electrified, and they don't because they don't have a supplier that can give them these solutions. But apart from that, we are also developing technologies and working with them to decarbonize the raw material production, like could be ammonia, could be steel, could be glass, and so forth. So start creating business models that will enable green steel, green cement, and so forth, that is going to be demanded by some other customers. Again, the demand is playing a key role in here, and I think we are doing this, and we will see a lot of results in this decade that will help us to write down the learning curve, decrease the cost, and, as Cristina said, scale all these solutions to other industrial clusters everywhere.
Thank you, Augustine. Now, Manuel, over to you. I heard Cristina say that the two energy companies are engaged in the cluster. We heard from Augustine about Iberdrola's role. What is Petronor's role?
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to the World Economic Forum, to Accenture, and of course to IPRI for the invitation to this event. Before answering your question, let me explain what the role of Petronor is going to play in the low carbon economy. As a leading energy company and part of the Repsol Group, Petronor is committed to net zero emissions policy by 2050, in line with the objectives set out by the Paris Agreement on climate change. To continue addressing, or to continue making progress toward this goal, we have drawn up a very demanding roadmap, which includes intermediate emission targets for different years: 15% by 2025, 28% by 2030, and 50% by 2040. Our aim is to lead the low carbon fuel market in the future, providing or making products such as non-biological renewable fuels and advanced biofuels available for our customers. But coming back to your question right now, our contribution to the net zero industrial supercluster is to support the decarbonization of our industry, offering not only our low carbon products I mentioned before, but also providing solutions for CO2 and for the waste industry management. Well, how are we doing that? We are working in two initiatives that are leveraged in our own industrial facilities and capabilities in a private-public partnership. Very interesting public-private partnership to ensure that our industry is competitive, very competitive in a low-carbon economy. Well, these two initiatives are the Basque Hydrogen Corridor and the circular economy. Based on our large-scale production and consumption of hydrogen and our CO2 management capacity, we are leading the Basque Hydrogen Corridor, which is an initiative to consolidate a hydrogen-based ecosystem in the Basque Country, of course, in connection with national and European clusters. And we are also pioneering a major circular economy initiative to provide a solution to the problem of the waste in our society, based also in our capabilities of our capability to process, to incorporate in our processes the products derived from the different treatments those wastes have. And in summary, I would say that based on our low carbon solutions, based on the Basque Hydrogen Corridor and our circular economy initiative, Petronor is driving the decarbonization of Basque industrial supercluster. Thank you.
Manuel, thank you for the details on Petronor. With that, audience, I'm going to close this part of the session. We will move on to another part, but before we do that, I just want to point out again that this has been the formal launch of this global initiative. I'd like to offer a huge thanks to those representing those 4 clusters that joined the global initiative. Thank you and congratulations for all of the progress that you've made so far in this. And just reflecting on what we heard here, we heard from companies operating in 3 markets, representing 4 clusters, all with different technologies, all with different operating models, but all with one goal, which is to decarbonize or get to net zero as quickly as possible. So with that, thank you all to those who were represented here. Next, I'd like to invite Melissa Stark up on stage. She's going to help us transition to a discussion on industrial clusters, but focused on the U.S. So not that we're creating some healthy competition here, but maybe. So let's hear what's going on in the U.S. And Melissa, with that, you come up on stage and we will leave and we'll transition to the next section.
So one thing I just want to remind everyone, I don't know if you were adding up the CO2 behind me in those slides, but it's well over 30 million tons of CO2 that those clusters represent. That is more than roughly the emissions of Denmark. If you had 10 clusters, which is our target for Davos, we might be able to get to 100 million tons. And I think Louise talked about the target that the World Economic Forum, Accenture, and EPRI set when we set up this initiative. By 2024, 100 clusters. So that could be 800 million tons. That's Germany, right? 800 million tons is Germany. So if you can imagine, if you can move clusters towards net zero, it's really, really, really significant. And you actually, as a lot of the speakers were saying, it's about progress and it's about movement. So imagine if some of those really big clusters in the US joined our initiative. So that is the strategy behind this US discussion, that is what we were trying to do. So let me introduce Arshad Mansour, the CEO of EPRI, who's collaborating with us on this initiative, and also welcome the US speakers in the US panel. There's going to be a couple virtual.
Well, thank you. It's an honor and pleasure to be here today. For those of you joining us virtually, welcome. For those of you who are here, Glasgow, this is the friendliest city on earth, and they have opened their arms from more than 200 countries, delegates that are at COP26. So thank you, Glasgow. Yes, it's a friendly competition. EPRI, if you don't know who EPRI is, really our mission aligns with the Net Zero Cluster very well. We shape the future of energy working together with more than 400 energy companies across 40 countries. Well, our focus is on the US, and we have some great all-star panelists coming in. I want to kind of start the discussion, if you can remember, 2 things. One, the challenge, and I'll say remember 30 by 30. And what is 30 by 30? 30% of the global emission today is coming from industry, around 30. And since 1990 to today, that emission has gone up by 30%. So now we have to get down to net zero. That is the challenge. The opportunity, remember 2 numbers, 10 by 10. In US, when we create 10 clusters like the Humber clusters, we can reduce US emission by 10%. So that's the opportunity we have. And at EPRI, through our low carbon resource initiative, one of the key innovation that is needed to make this happen is to figure out how to effectively and affordably we can create clean molecules, hydrogen, liquid ammonia, synthetic methane, from clean electricity that can come from fossil fuel carbon capture, from electrolyzers, wind and solar, but also from advanced nuclear. So that's the opportunity we want to realize. And to realize that opportunity, we have 3 all-star panelists. As soon as I see our virtual panelists coming in, I'm going to introduce our first virtual panelist who doesn't need any introduction. Secretary Moniz was the Energy Secretary of U.S. from Obama's second administration, CEO of Energy Future Initiatives, one of the founder of MIT Energy Initiative, and proud to have Secretary Moniz as part of EPRI's advisory council. So Secretary Moniz, talk about the Energy Futures Initiative work that you have done on net zero clusters from a U.S. perspective. What did we learn?
Well, thank you, Arshad. And first of all, congratulations to WEF and Accenture and EPRI for this really important work. We'll get back to the friendly competition part that you advertised. Clearly, net zero is it's in the air, and it's and for a good reason. It's obviously essential for us to meet our climate goals. But I do want to recall that, as we all know, carbon dioxide, of course, is a cumulative issue. So how we get there is also important, and that includes the very important Biden administration goal of a 50% reduction, roughly, by 2030. And I would say that, having analyzed that, this will not be easy to achieve. And we think that these industrial clusters are going to be one of the essential elements for reaching those goals in 2030 and, of course, in 2050. I think, Arshad, I would say that the conversation around pathways to net zero has evolved dramatically in just a few years, where firm power, where the need for low carbon fuels, where the need for negative carbon technologies have all, I think, come into the conversation in new and much more, frankly, realistic ways. And I would just note that one technology that can contribute in all of those 3 areas is carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. Obviously, it can be applied to power plants and industrial facilities. It can be applied for blue hydrogen, as you've already indicated. It can be applied to negative carbon technologies like direct air capture and BECCS, bioenergy with CCS. So this is a really important theme, and I think will play a role in a number of the industrial clusters. So bringing us to hubs, we're focusing on some combination of hydrogen and CO2 management as being in the hubs, clearly bringing together producers and users. But we think the hub development is absolutely the key to doing early market development, certainly in the United States, in these areas of hydrogen and CCS. And one of the reasons is that infrastructure, as we know, is always hard. And I think one of the features of these hubs is it certainly doesn't eliminate the need for infrastructure by any means, but it does, I think, reduce the challenges and, frankly, create stakeholders, local, regional stakeholders who have a stake in seeing that infrastructure realized. And that is a very, very big deal, frankly, in the politics, where I mean politics in the positive sense, bringing people along to support the direction in which we are going. Now, clearly, there are challenges. There's cost challenges and the like. But let me note that at EFI, we have looked into, at various levels, 4 different opportunities, all very attractive, 4 out of a much larger number that will come forward. But we looked at the Los Angeles Basin, which of course includes the ports, Los Angeles, Long Beach. which eventually will have ships coming in to them as the supply chains get worked out. We did that in collaboration with Stanford. We've looked at the Ohio River Valley, the intersection of kind of West Virginia, southwestern Pennsylvania, and eastern Ohio. And we've done that with the AFL-CIO through our Labor Energy Partnership. This is all indicative of the broad range of stakeholders with a strong interest in this hub development. We looked just recently at the Carolinas as an example of a green hydrogen hub. And of course, we've been part of the discussion in the Houston, Texas, Gulf Coast led initiatives for hubs. All of these have a significant industrial base, so that's a common theme here, but yet they also have very, very different characters. I'm going to let Miriam talk about the Los Angeles situation. I'll just mention, for example, in the Ohio River Valley, you see a company like U.S. Steel in the forefront of leading that development for the obvious potential of hydrogen in that case being a reducing element for clean steel. But we also have large NGCC plants producing many megatons of carbon dioxide, which need to be sequestered. But then we have companies like EQT operating in the Marcellus, where you have both the gas for the blue hydrogen and the sequestration opportunities. Carolinas, I already mentioned, a green hydrogen opportunity, but going to Texas, their focus, where they already have a significant amount of hydrogen infrastructure for the refineries, there they see the market development focusing initially on heavy transportation. So very, very different characters in the regional hubs, but all servicing this idea that we can bring producers, users, and infrastructure together and really help, especially in the decarbonization of industry. Now, as we go forward in the United States, we make no bones about it. We have a lot to learn from Europe, and we've just seen examples of why. But I think we can catch up, perhaps, and catch up not because of competitive juices, catch up because, again, we need this for market formation already in this decade to move forward and really get a leg up on the decarbonization challenge. Finally, of course, we will also need a lot of policy and regulation. If you just take the hydrogen challenges, obviously there's cost and many issues, but one area that we will be increasingly looking at for both hydrogen and CCS is development of the regulatory structures that are going to be needed to get these hubs and to get those technologies kickstarted, because investability is a major issue. We need to attract a lot of private capital, and for that we need the kind of certainty that we can drive with better regulatory structures. And finally, we need broad coalitions. I already mentioned labor as one example, but broad coalitions in these regionally focused hubs is so critical for developing the political and the civil society support that one needs to go forward in an aggressive way. So that's really, I think, we're still at the beginning of trying to develop these, but I think there's a lot of momentum. In fact, I'll end by saying on the policy side that the infrastructure bill currently before Congress, which I still believe is going to get passed, it has in it, for example, $8 billion to be seed money to get 4 blue and green hydrogen hubs moving. So there's a lot of interest in all the right quarters, and I hope that we will see these realized in the next few years. At EFI, we'll continue to focus on this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Muniz. It's amazing the opportunity that we have. And remember the 10 by 10, 10% reduction of emission you can do just by putting 10 Humber-style clusters in U.S. Our next panelist, president of SoCalGas, part of Sempra Utilities, one of the largest gas and electric infrastructure in U.S., Marion Brown. And I mentioned about Low Carbon Resource Initiative. More than 50 energy companies have come in, and it's a $1 billion initiative on the innovation side, public-private partnership. SoCalGas was actually one of the first founding members of that. Miriam, talk about the LA Basin opportunity, and in the spirit of competition, how soon, how fast can we move there?
Thank you very much, Arshad, and it's wonderful to be here on this panel. And it's hard to follow the world-renowned and recognized Ernie Moniz, but I'll do my very best to go into that deeper level on what it is that we have the opportunity for here in the LA Basin with industrial clusters. I think that there is considerable momentum around industrial clusters here in the LA Basin, and I think that there's two foundational reasons for that. The first is California's long-standing leadership with respect to energy and environment, and our Lieutenant Governor spoke to this point yesterday at the COP. It is often the case that California becomes a beacon for other parts of the United States. I think the second goes to a theme that we've talked about a lot during this session, and that's really the economies of scale that the LA Basin could bring. Yes, obviously the Los Angeles Basin is a major population center, but what matters even more in this context is that the Los Angeles Basin is the largest manufacturing center in the United States. For example, the same types of industries that we've been talking about, refining and steel and glass manufacturing. It is also, as Secretary Moniz mentioned, the largest international trading hub in the United States. A third of the goods that pass through the United States pass through Los Angeles ports and airports and are sent to distribution centers all over North America. So we at SoCalGas, we're the gas utility for all of Southern California, have done extensive analysis to understand the role of gas infrastructure in the energy transition. And we published a good bit of this analytics last week, and I would encourage anyone interested to review the work, as it is both objective and robust. It's first of its kind in its nature in that it analyzed several scenarios to achieve net zero with the gas and electric systems integrated, optimizing for that the way the system works now. And especially important is folding in clean fuels like we've been talking about today, hydrogen and renewable natural gas and carbon management through carbon capture and sequestration, folding those fuels in over time the way it needs to work tomorrow. The results of the study were very clear. 3 key points: clean fuels like hydrogen and renewable natural gas and carbon management will be essential to achieving net zero. A second important key point, and I think that this is part of our evolved understanding of how we really get to these net zero goals, is that electrification and clean fuels are not competitors. They actually complement each other. They are perfect partners. And the third speaks to something that I know that there's a lot of focus on, particularly for utilities, and that's the importance of leveraging existing gas systems to transport clean fuels as the most cost-effective pathway. And the economics do matter, and it seems as though Europe and the examples we've been talking about are taking a very similar path for a similar reason. The economics matter. The analysis that I mentioned, it drives our business strategy to focus on 3 key areas that go straight to the heart of industrial clusters. The first is heavy-duty transportation, which is approximately 12% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the state of California, where hydrogen and renewable natural gas can improve air quality along LA freeways right now, displacing diesel fuels, especially near the ports. It can play a significant role to reduce emissions, and I think that there's a great deal of stakeholder support for that. The second is likewise, beyond hydrogen's ability to store energy for long periods of time, its unique ability to deliver heat for industrial processes is essential, and it's also important to industrial jobs. And powering industrial activity is not a peripheral concern that we have here. It is integral to a healthy California economy. Blending hydrogen into existing pipelines and building new hydrogen pipelines will keep that manufacturing and industry strong. We are testing blending hydrogen in our pipeline infrastructure now, and we have a goal of seeking to fold approximately 20% into our system over time. And obviously, electric generation and the ability for gases to support dispatchable power is essential to a thriving economy as well. We supported the University of California at Irvine's demonstrating the first power-to-gas project in the country, and it is good to see that technology advancing across the United States in multiple demonstration projects. And then the last piece that I'll mention as an important part of the momentum around an industrial cluster here in Los Angeles is with our electric utility, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and their leadership to convert their gas power generation to clean fuels. And that will be a very important off-taker anchor customer for the hydrogen economy. So in our view, Los Angeles is poised to be a clean fuels hub and a leading U.S. clean fuels hub. We appreciated the opportunity to speak to this opportunity at DOE's recent Hydrogen Shot event that they hosted, and that momentum was clear with that participation. And we just think that there is a perfect nexus here for an industrial cluster because all of the ingredients that we've been talking about are present: the need, the vision, the capital, and political will. And we at SoCalGas, the largest gas utility in North America, we appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with the broad range of stakeholders here and lead in a jurisdiction like this. So thanks very much for the opportunity to showcase that opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Miriam. I mean, I think you are reinforcing the point of partnership. The opportunity for electric utilities, gas utilities to partner with cement industry, steel industry. This is really what we talk about in our innovation challenge, which is how does electrons create clean molecules? And how do we make sure molecules that we don't want to emit, like CO2, we have an infrastructure to sequester it and to store it. So innovation is a big part of this, but it's not just innovation. This transition has to be a just transition. And Department of Energy in the U.S. is working on both sides. So we have with us our final panelist, Dr. Wilcox, Assistant Secretary of Department of Energy's Office of Fossil and Carbon Management. So Dr. Wilcox, tell us about the work that National Labs and Department of Energy is doing on both innovation and just transition.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, too. So one thing that I want to point out is when we saw the Accenture video at the beginning, you noticed the industrial facilities that were there and operating, and that there's also a lot of air pollution associated with the industrial sector. And so what we're doing is more engagement. When we look at deploying these technologies, we absolutely need to be thinking about the communities and the folks that are actually living at the fence lines of these communities, and being able to understand that the investments we make can lead to benefits to those communities. And so a lot of what we're doing is really engaging in those communities and understanding what those concerns are. A lot of times it's air pollution. And when you look at carbon capture, it actually has the potential of reducing other co-pollutants, not just carbon, but reducing, for instance, the precursors to acid rain, SOx, NOx, particulate matter. And so a lot of the carbon capture, in order to be effective for carbon removal, there needs to be a pre-scrubbing step. And so when you implement carbon capture on these industrial sources, you're actually cleaning the atmosphere at the same time of these other pollutants. And so that's something that we've been messaging. The other piece is restorative justice. And so there's been legacy impacts associated with the industrial sector and also fossil fuels in general. And so looking at, for instance, waste products associated with our dependence on fossil fuels and also the industrial sector, whether it's steel slag or whether it's fly ash, these are oftentimes can be used as feedstocks for lowering the carbon intensity of cement, for making building materials and products. And so this restorative justice is an opportunity to really help to reverse some of the legacy impacts of the industry.
We got to make sure the transition that is going to happen, has started to happen, it is just for all and it's equitable. And what you heard today on the U.S. side, going back to the friendly competition that started this thing, wait for the $8 billion that come out from the infrastructure bill. Wait for the $1 billion of innovation that LCRI is going to launch with private-public partnership. We have a lot to learn from the world. You heard about the industrial clusters in different parts of the world, and we will learn, but we're promising you that we'll come back and we'll share with you as we start accelerating. This is a great opportunity for us. Remind you that 30 by 30, that's the challenge. Let's not forget, emission has gone up by 30% in the last 30 years. You can set up targets as much as you want, but you got to understand the reality. And also 30% of the emission in the U.S. is coming on the globally is coming from the industry. But from a U.S. perspective, just 10 of those clusters can reduce our emission by 10%. So with that opportunity, I want to thank all the panelists. This has been a great panel. Thank you so much. And I want to now pass it on to Stephanie to close the session. Thank you.
I'll close it. That's okay. But thank you, Arshad. Thank you, Jennifer. Miriam has gone. But I think just a couple of things to leave you with. I think industrial clusters, I hope you got the message, inclusive, just transition, right? So we're all talking about running to net zero, and we are running to net zero as fast as we can, but we have to bring everybody with us. And the reason that industrial clusters I'm really passionate about, it is broad coalitions. You heard broad coalitions, you heard jobs, you heard economic development. Quinana, huge revitalization, right? That's a 100-year-old cluster, and they're now going to be EV-centered manufacturing, right? So I think that just an inclusive transition is a really important message. And so we've launched every Accenture World Economic Forum. We're very proud that we've launched this initiative. Tomorrow, in the Blue Zone, for those of you who are there, we're going to let the clusters tell you a little bit more about themselves. We had them make these fantastic videos. And so we will be showing those videos in the Action Hub tomorrow at 4 p.m., and we'll be elevating the launch of this cluster. So if you're there, come join us, and we can even get a question or something on stage, and you can ask a really good question, and we'll call on you tomorrow. So 4 o'clock tomorrow, Louise and I will be there, Action Hub, Blue Zone. And you can also watch it live if you're not there in person. And we will be showing videos and promoting and elevating this launch. Great. So thanks, everybody.